Hello there, little masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, well, the good stuff is nothing to sneeze at, unless you're a poor hobbit with a cold.
West to all, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, the boatman to my raft elf, Alan Sisto.
I like that one. Folks, today we are going to get through Chapter 10 of The Hobbit, A Warm Welcome. That's right, the entire chapter in one episode. It's been a while.
Yes.
Bilbo and his companions, and they really are his companions now, aren't they?
They really are.
Finally out of Mirkwood, and they are within sight of the Lonely Mountain.
And in this chapter, we're going to see a settlement of men for the first time in this book. Seems hard to believe that we haven't seen men play much of a role in this book at all, except for Beorn. Well, that's about to change.
That is, all in good time. But first, why don't we get on to our first segment? It's another installment of Philology Fair.
Yeah.
Your favorite stinger.
It is. Well, today's Philology Fair is actually going to be a little bit different from usual. Mm-hmm. Usually we like to talk about a word or words that Tolkien sort of reclaimed from the dustbin of history. Well, Today I'd like to talk about two words that have been in everyday use pretty much for centuries. And because they're so common, I think most of us probably have never stopped to think about their etymology, which is a shame because when we compare these two words in their history, it sheds some interesting light on this chapter that I think we'll really enjoy taking a look at.
Okay, well, don't keep us waiting, Sean. What two words are we looking at?
I'm just trying to build the suspense.
Bated breath.
I want to take a look at the words king and master.
Oh.
Two very common words that we're going to start to see come into conflict with each other as soon as Thorin enters Lake Town.
I'm used to being called both, just so you're aware. And I
But only by your family, right?
Oh, no, all of you. All of you may call me king or master, your preference.
Yeah, yep.
In an informal basis, you may call me sir.
I will call you boatman, and that is it. The man of the West.
All right, Alfred.
Not King Elisar.
All right, sorry about that.
All right.
We digress.
So, we do digress. That only took 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, so let's start with king. So king is a Germanic word. It comes from Old English, and I probably should have looked up how to pronounce this before the episode started recording, but I believe it's Kuning.
Yeah, I think so.
Basically, C-Y-N, Kun, plus ing. Now, the second element, that ing suffix, is a patronymic suffix in Old English. Basically, that means son of.
Right.
And we see this usage all over Tolkien's work.
Yeah.
I think that's not a surprise.
Yeah, the Beornings, the Eorlingus, right.
Exactly. Now, the first element of that word, kun, C-Y-N, is essentially the same as our modern word kin. But in Old English, it meant something more like kindred or race or nation, a people.
Right. Yeah.
It's related to a host of words in many languages that have to do with family relationships and birth, and there's even some English words derived from like Greek and Latin, things like genus, generation, gentleman.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm just rambling, but
well, sure.
All of those GEN words that have to do with family relationships or birth are all related to the same root.
Interesting.
But anyway, the king or the kuning seems to literally mean a son of the people.
Right.
And when I looked this up in the online etymology dictionary, that is very interesting.
I mean, he's the king. He's more like the father of the people, I would imagine, from his perspective,
well,
at least.
And that's what's interesting about it, because, and I looked this up in the online etymology dictionary, there was a little note that, the sociological and ideological implications render this a topic of much debate.
Well,
and I think that's exactly that question. Is the king the father of the people, the son of the people? What kind of, I'm sure you could come up with all sorts of different political ideologies just based off of this.
And arguments for both. Yeah, you really could.
Right, exactly. But the idea seems to be, at a minimum, that this is a person who's descended from noble birth and whose identity is linked to the identity of the people he rules.
Yeah, that's interesting because initially that's quite true. But, I'm thinking about kings in medieval times.
Like in the late Middle Ages.
Right. And you've got kings from France ruling over England and kings from, Germany.
Kings of German roots and things. Yeah, that's a really good point. Over time, that has kind of changed a bit for most of Europe.
But not for Thorin.
No, I think that's what's interesting here. Yeah.
I mean, he's clearly, my thought is, clearly he's a man of noble birth. We talk about him being Durin's heir. And he's really the leader of his people. I mean, the dwarves of the Blue Mountains are his folk. They're his kin.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly for, a culture that's in exile as his is, a people that's in exile as his is,
diaspora,
this sense of his diaspora, this sense of a noble birth is really, it's really kind of key to their identity. Just the fact that there is still this person who can claim the title of King Under the Mountain, I think is very important for the Dwarvish people. So,
absolutely.
I mean, he is an enormously important dwarf, and I think it's in more ways than one.
That's true. I mean, I know we've kind of, at the beginning, we sort of mocked that because it's almost like he's self-important, and he is. He's very haughty about it. But, the truth of the matter is, he is an important dwarf. And we see that mentioned by, the Goblin King when he says, I know all about you and about your people. And and then we even see with Thranduil, who knows who he is. Not just by name, but by the fact that he's the son of... Oh, no, I'm sorry. Of course, the Elven King does. I was thinking... didn't Beorn know who he was?
I think he might have, actually.
I think he did.
Yeah.
I think he did. He knew, that he was of that line. That he could trust them because this was a line of dwarves that had done, good things.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he knew his heritage if he didn't know him personally.
Right.
Yeah. So that's king. Now, let's turn to that other word that I want to talk about that we'll see a lot in this chapter.
And by the way,
master.
I did just confirm that. He says, if it's true that you are Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, I believe. So even Thorin hadn't given his heritage, and yet Beorn knew it.
He just recognized
really
his bearing. Maybe he recognized his face.
Well, or the name Thorin, I mean,
Oh, because he had already given his first name.
He'd given his first name. He just hadn't said son of... he hadn't given his heritage.
Right, gotcha. Okay. Right. Got it. Okay. Yeah, of course. Well, so master, on the other hand, master is not a Germanic word. It is a word with Latin origins. It ultimately comes from the Latin magister, which basically means a director or a chief or a teacher. It has been in English for a long time. It's not like it's a recent borrowing. It was actually borrowed into Old English, so that tells us it's at least older than 1066.
Right, pre-Norman invasion,
Right. But during the Middle Ages, it usually had either an academic connotation, so basically somebody with authority to teach at a university, like our modern usage of a master's degree,
right?
Or it had sort of a trade guild connotation, like a master craftsman, master smith,
right? Like
and I think
the highest level you could achieve at a particular craft,
in a particular trade, in a particular craft, and I think that's the most on-point meaning here, as we'll see later when we get to the discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's clearly a word that, it doesn't have the visceral sense of identity that I think king or queening has.
No, it's more of a role than an identity.
Yeah, it's like something that someone could attain. I mean, you talk about a trade guild master or an academic master. That's something you study long enough, you practice your trade long enough, you will attain this.
Right.
This level.
I can become a master podcaster, but I can never become a king.
Right.
How do you become king then?
By exploiting the workers. Holding on to outdated imperialist dogma.
The Lady of the Lake.
Oh, man, certainly not. Strange women lying in ponds distributing swords.
That's no basis for a system of government.
Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not some farcical aquatic ceremony. All right.
That's awesome.
We should probably stop.
Oh, man.
But,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You can learn to become a master. You can't
learn to become king.
You can't learn to become a king.
That's true.
So, and it's definitely a word that seems to have some negative connotations here in this chapter, as we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Obviously, Tolkien doesn't always use it negatively. I mean, I think we see tons of uses of Sam is called Master Samwise,
right?
Frodo is Sam's master and Gollum's master. Then occasionally it is used in a negative way. Feanor desire to master minds.
That's right.
It's just an interesting, and of course he used king, positively and negatively too. But But I think that's really the key. Is it doesn't have that sense of identity with the people that a king does.
You're right. Well, he's a master, but he's not much of a leader. But he's certainly a consummate politician, as we'll see. Quite adept at figuring out which way the winds are blowing, I would say. But
he certainly is. Yeah, he actually reminds me of another leader we've seen in the First Age, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
I'm thinking
another consummate politician of the First Age.
Yes,
he just kind of Follows the way the wind is blowing.
Follows the way the wind is
Oh,
going.
we'll get to it soon enough.
All right. Well, let's get on to the discussion for now. We'll start right at the beginning of the chapter, and I'll read the first couple of paragraphs. I love this because it's another. We so rarely get to read landscape descriptions, but I'm going to go ahead and do that here.
Cool.
The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, the river rounded a steep shoulder of land that came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff, the deepest stream had flowed lapping and bubbling. Suddenly the cliff fell away. The shores sank. The trees ended. Then Bilbo saw a sight. The lands opened wide about him, filled with the waters of the river, which broke up and wandered in 100 winding courses, or halted in marshes and pools, dotted with isles on every side. But still a strong water flowed on steadily through the midst. And far away, its dark head in a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain. Its nearest neighbors to the northeast, and the tumbled land that joined it to them, could not be seen. All alone it rose, and looked across the marshes to the forest. The lonely mountain! Bilbo had come far and through many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it in the least. Wow. Yeah, I finally got here. Wow, that's not a good thing.
Wow, do I really want to be here
I
right
don't
now?
think I want to be here anymore. Can I leave? This is...
It's interesting because it starts out looking like excitement. You first see the lonely mountain, ! And then,
yeah.
I don't like the look of that in the least.
No.
It turns from excitement to dread pretty quickly.
I'll have none
of that. If it ever really started as excitement.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. What a moment, though, finally seeing this end goal. And I think it's the knowledge that the dragon's there, of course, that's the part.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
I mean, otherwise it's a beautiful mountain. Why wouldn't you want to see it? But I think Bilbo's
It's interesting that this chapter
dreading
begins and ends with Bilbo thinking about the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing
that's true.
Realizing what's coming next for their quest.
Yeah, and because he's very much in charge of the quest, it seems, at this point.
He certainly is, yeah.
And he knows that even if he hadn't taken charge yet, that once they get to that lonely mountain, it's his job to get him in.
Right.
He's the one that was supposed to, sit on the doorstep and think of something?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. So he's kind of coming to that. He's kind of coming to that decision point now for him. Like,
this is why they pay me the big bucks. He says.
This is why they pay me the big bucks, or they promise me the big bucks that they don't have yet.
1/14 of nothing. Carry the nothing.
Right.
Still nothing.
Carry the
nothing. Luck strikes again. Of course. I mean, he's able to. We're not reading this part, but he hears the raftsmen, and these are elves still. I know. That's one thing to keep in mind as he listens to the talk of the raftmen. Those are elves still. They're just They're the raftmen. That's their job.
Raftmen, in the sense of a person, not a human.
Right, or that's their job title, I guess.
Yeah.
But so he hears them, and they reveal some important facts. That there's some trade disagreements. They both. They're both part of NAFTA, and they want out. I don't know. The Lakemen and Wood Elves can't quite figure out what to do.
It's interesting. You make that joke, and it's a funny enough joke, but you stop to think about, like, this is the first time you hear about trade disagreements, and we're talking about humans.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about elves too.
Yeah.
But once you bring men into the mix, it's like now we got to talk about trade disagreements, and it's interesting how mundane some of the details
very
become.
Practical. Very day to day. And that makes sense. I mean, given men's relatively short lifespan in comparison to the serial longevity of the elves, they're trying to deal with that day to day existence in a way that elves are just kind of whatever about. I mean, really,
elves can just frolic in the forest all the time,
right? Because if it takes them 100 years to figure something out, they don't care.
Right, that's true. That is true.
They have ultimate patience because they don't need to have anything else.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So.
I've got nothing but time.
That's right. Oh, man. The rapid change that's happening. They talk about, he's overhearing them, things like, not just since the dwarves were in Erebor, because the dwarves were in Erebor, my goodness, almost 200 years ago at this point. Smaug took Erebor in 1170. That's 171 years before this moment. So they're not just talking about...
that's the Shire Reckoning?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Shire Reckoning, 1170. My apology. Thanks for clarifying that, because it's certainly not Third Age. I don't have the Third Age year handy. But it's 1170, and that's 171 years ago.
Yeah.
We knew that.
Yeah.
We knew in terms
I'm trying to figure out what year. I mean, I know this is 2941, so whatever that is.
Yeah. So I can't do the math that quickly. I'd have to pull up the calculator. But
that's fine. We'll just go with Shire Reckoning for now.
Yeah, Shire Reckoning 1170. So 171 years have passed since the dwarves were in Erebor. So, even though Thorin was there as a young dwarf when they left, and Balin was there, and those.
This is a long time for men. This is not one lifetime for men. Yeah,
that's right. This is so many generations of men. This is that would be about almost 7 generations of men. I mean, isn't a generation about 25 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
25 to 35. Yeah. About that.
Yeah. So 6, 7 generations.
Let's split the difference. Let's say 30. I mean, it's definitely 5 or 6 generations.
Yeah, 6 generations certainly. But even in recent years. It's not just since they've been gone that there have been changes. We even get that since Gandalf had heard news, that there have been changes in the landscape, floods and earthquakes and vanished paths and an increased amount of marshlands and bogs.
Really hard times for these people.
Yeah.
Between the political bickering and the economic troubles and the landscape changes, you're talking about the kind of stuff that hurts your crops.
Really
makes it hard to grow enough food for people.
That's right.
It's just interesting.
It is, and in fact, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and to live in the shadow of the dragon. I mean, I know it's been long enough that most of them don't remember.
Yeah, the men don't necessarily believe it.
Some don't believe it. But surely the wise. We know that the wise and even some of the foolish know that there's a dragon up there.
Oh yeah.
It just feels to me a little bit like living at the foot of an active volcano.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm sure the town of Pompeii wasn't worried about Mount Vesuvius erupting at that particular moment.
Yeah, I'm sure they probably never thought it was.
Some of them thought it might never erupt
happen
again
in their lifetime. You never think it's going to happen in your lifetime.
No, that's true. I mean, I understand that. I live in California, and everybody talks about the big one, and I've lived through some pretty significant quakes. The Northridge quake in 94, I think that was. Silmar back in 72 or 73. I was a little kid. But the fact is, though, those aren't the big ones. Those aren't the big one is going to be the big one, and it's going to be absolutely freaking terrifying. Yeah. And I just keep on thinking it's not going to happen in my lifetime, because if it is, there's nothing I can do to stop it. And I can prepare, but I'm.
There's only so much you can prepare.
I mean, I've got several gallons of water. I've got some, a few days worth of food and stuff. I mean, I'm not a survivalist. I don't have
you don't have buckets and buckets of
no buckets
MREs
of food.
And stuff like that.
I've got maybe 3 days worth of canned foods that we rotate out every year, and
some
maybe
Vienna sausages and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've got like I think 12 gallons of water on a shelf in the garage. So if the garage collapses, I'm doomed anyway.
Right. See, for me, like I lived a little while in California, but most of my life has been more in hurricane areas.
Yeah.
Well, Austin's a little bit inland, so we don't get much hurricane activity unless it's a really big one.
Yeah, like that one. Yeah, like the one that hit Houston.
Yeah, we got a little bit from that, but and it's hilly enough here that we don't get many tornadoes. But
that's good.
But yeah, I mean, even like being from New Orleans, having seen something like Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. I mean, you never expect something like that is going to happen to people you know.
No, you're right.
And that's kind of what the dragon is. The dragon is
an
just a natural disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah. And the oldest folks are like, I remember when one happened and it was devastating, you people. Don't forget that this is going to happen.
Right.
But in the meantime, the geographical changes had an impact on the story. I'm going to have you read the next little bit there.
The elf road through the wood which the dwarves had followed on the advice of Beorn now came to a doubtful and little-used end at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north to the mountain-shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the Wood Elves' king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins, shivering on the barrels, if he had known that news of this had reached Gandalf far away, and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know it.
No, he did not.
Nope.
Again, crazy stuff. If you had not gotten captured by the Elven King and figured out a way to get out, and that way out involved the river, you wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, some kind of crazy luck here.
Yeah. I mean, had they heeded, don't leave the path, they'd have died.
They would. That's a very good point. Yeah. That is a very good point. Yeah.
And even this path was originally not their original choice, right? I mean, they were going to go to
That's right, because they would have just gone
to the middle
normal
path there,
the
that
road in the
normal road.
south. Yeah. Which would not have been safe at all.
No. It's used by goblins and bad critters.
Thanks to their capture by goblins and their escape, they came across Beorn. He said, "No, take this northern path."
But even that wasn't
And then even
safe.
that path wasn't safe. Because they would and that one they would have gotten all the way to the end before they realized
it just ends in marshes, and we wouldn't have been able to get out. Wouldn't have been able.
What
to
are we
escape.
supposed to do now? Go back?
Yeah. Oh goodness.
And just thinking of dragging out that Mirkwood journey any longer than they had to.
You're
has
not
to be
kidding.
miserable.
Go back.
Amazing
and do
luck.
What? Go
Incredible.
Back to, yeah. Exactly.
Incredible luck.
More and more of this luck that's just, I think in the last episode we talked about how luck appears something like 50 times. But think about all the times where the word isn't used.
The word isn't
the
mentioned, but
concept
it's
is clear.
clearly, it's clearly that's what's at work.
I mean, that's why it's an even bigger, concept, a bigger theme than those 50 appearances might suggest. It's the same thing with comfort, too. We've talked about comfort and uncomfortable.
Yeah, sometimes you don't see the word
and
comfort.
yet there's synonyms or antonyms.
Uncomfortable.
Or just a description that fits one of the
Or just
other.
a description of, the description of eating bacon at home and things like that.
Right,
that
and you realize you're hearing comfort versus being on a barrel that keeps rotating into the cold river and dunking you underwater.
Right. Yeah.
My
so
goodness.
very, very lucky.
Very
sure doesn't feel lucky right now.
No,
but
no.
He's poor shivering Mr. Baggins. I have to note the Mr. Baggins again.
Yeah, you're right. In a somewhat Tookish moment.
Yeah,
I do love the reference to Gandalf here at this point. Because he's been really out of the story, very absent, ever since he left the party before they entered Mirkwood.
Yeah,
I think he'd been mentioned a couple times as, they wish Gandalf were still there, but that's really about it. This is the first time we're kind of given a reference to what he's doing.
Right.
And that, here he's finishing his other business, which, though it doesn't come into this tale, does come into the legendarium as a whole, doesn't it?
The next tale, yes. Very big business.
Big business. And that, and now he's getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. It sure would be nice if he could get here quickly, but,
Yes, it would. Well, we will see him before the end.
We will. So we get the first mention of the nasty cold in the nose in the next paragraph.
Yeah.
And as they get closer to Lake Town here, so the mountain continues to loom and threaten until the river takes that bend to the south and then east back to the lake.
Seems to frown at him and threaten him. I love that.
Cool?
We see these moments where the trees or the landscape itself sort of
takes on some human characteristics. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Here it is frowning at him. It's sort of embodying his fear of what's coming,
Absolutely. And then you've got a little, not to read, but you've observed this note, kind of an astronomical note, huh?
Oh, yeah. The next paragraph he talks, he looks off to the north, and far off in the north he sees the stars of the Wain already twinkling.
Yeah.
Now, the Wain is the constellation that Tolkien would have called the Plough, I believe, because that's what it's most commonly called in the UK.
Right.
We in the U.S. call the Big Dipper.
Yep.
Part of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, is also known in the Legendarium as the Sickle of the Valar.
The Valakirka.
It's actually mentioned.
I had to
Valakirka,
say it before.
that's
I know
right.
you probably had that in your notes, but I had to say Valakirka.
That's fine. You're allowed. It's such a cool word, though.
It is, isn't it?
The Valakirka in the Silmarillion, set high in the north by Varda as a challenge to Melkor.
I really love all the cool constellation names. Manel Makar and his shining belt. I love that stuff. That's just awesome.
Two names given of that. So that's Orion. Yeah, there's Manel Makar and Menelvagor are both names for the same constellation.
Yep. Love that.
And then there's a whole bunch of stars and planets and.
Oh, I know.
One of the History of Middle-earth books, I think Christopher Tolkien gives names for all the different planets in Elvish.
Well, we won't ever get to the History of Middle-earth. It will be like 73 years old.
Probably not, because this is even one of the really late ones. It's like volume 9 or 10 or something.
My co-host is getting out of the hospital today, and so we might be able to.
A little sleepy, and but today we're going to talk about what the elves called the planet Mercury.
Those of you still with us, now that we're on episode 579. Yeah, no.
It'll be more like our kids.
Seriously, yeah.
So Dad was going to talk about this. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Why do they like these books so much? I don't know.
Oh, they'll love these books. You kidding me?
I know they will. I know.
We'll
controversy
make them love it.
That's right. You will.
They don't love it, they won't eat. No, just kidding. You get nothing but gruel until you say you love the Lord of the Rings. Then we'll go ahead and feed you some real food. No,
we're not going to be nearly as kind as Corey Olson when we talked to him. But when he talked about not wanting to force Tolkien on his kids.
Yeah. We're definitely. We're already reading The Hobbit. So
we're already reading The Hobbit. I already read it a couple of times.
Yeah. So they get to Lake Town, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up the next couple paragraphs. Not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out on the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the entering river by a promontory of rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where, on huge piles made of forest trees, was built a busy wooden town, not a town of elves, but of men, who still dared to dwell here under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain. They still throve on the trade that came up the great river from the south and was carted past the falls to their town. But in the great days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and there had been fleets of boats on the waters, and some were filled with gold, and some with warriors in armor, and there had been wars and deeds which were now only a legend. The rotting piles of a greater town could still be seen along the shores when the waters sank in a drought. But men remembered little of all that, though some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings of the mountain, Thror and Thrain of the race of Durin, and of the coming of the dragon and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang, too, that Thror and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers through the mountain gates, and all that land would be filled with new song and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. There we go.
Interesting.
There's a lot here to talk about.
History has become legend now for them,
And legend has become myth. Sorry. 500 years.
Hey, anything that makes me think of, Cate Blanchett reading
it's not a bad
cool dialogue.
That's true.
Is not a bad thing. Yeah.
That is true. There's some really interesting stuff to talk about here. First off, we talked last episode about Bilbo maybe making a swim for it across the cold river because he was, afraid he might die. This is another thing that would absolutely freak out most hobbits. A city on a lake? I'm not going there. You people are nuts.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
But a city on a lake, I love it. There's
just connected by a bridge, just basically up on these wooden,
big logs,
wooden,
piles,
piles. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, piles. Yep.
Unbelievable. That though. There's
a cool technological.
Technological,
thing to imagine this.
Yeah, you have to really. I mean, how deep would you have to drive those piles in order to make sure that it wouldn't shift?
Right.
Because you're building a city on top of this. You don't want it to move much.
Right.
And obviously that requires some.
Yeah, unlike building a bridge or something where a little bit of movement.
And a lot of the bridge is going to be secured on the two sides, in the land, and so you could handle a little bit of that. But here, the entire city is balancing on these, poles, essentially that are driven into the lake bed. But they are near shore, so presumably this was something that they could do. They didn't need fully trained scuba teams to build this, so which is good because they didn't have any. Right. The thing that I really noticed here that just leaped off the page, because I love history and I love kind of. I can't say I love archaeology. I don't know enough about it, but I love the idea of finding something old that tells you about something that happened in the past. And
I know where you're going. Yeah,
you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
The line, it's at the end of that first paragraph, and it's just a throwaway line. The rotting piles of a greater town could still be seen along the shores when the waters sank in the drought.
Yeah.
This is a literal ruin as a textual ruin. You know, we've talked about the idea of textual ruins, and how there are elements in the story that remind you of the past of this tale, of something that happened before.
Something that happened before that you don't fully know about.
The Cats of Queen Beruthiel was something that we mentioned as a great example of a textual ruin. And
they give depth to the world. They make the world feel real.
Exactly.
But you never find out everything about them.
That's
or
the
much
whole
about
point.
them at all.
Yeah, and again, we don't find anything here either. But here we have a literal archaeological ruin that is serving the purpose of a textual ruin.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's a great catch.
I mean, this lake town that's visited by Thorin and company is Lake Town 2, as an archaeologist would call it. And as we know from the end of this story, spoiler, a third one is going to be built.
Someday archaeologists will find it and say, I think Lake Town 2 was destroyed by fire.
Yeah, and it fell to the bottom of the lake, and there's a lot of burned wood, and there's a dragon carcass nearby, so there's a clue.
Well done.
But Ratliff pointed out something here. He talked about, and I think he was actually citing Hammond and Skull in some of this, because they talked about how his knowledge of real history was something that he developed in order to create a feigned history. You know, his whole point here was to create a believable historical story.
And he knew enough about real history to be able to create something convincing.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And here's a quote from Ratliff that I really thought was a little bit telling. A closer look at the evidence shows that Tolkien was very well versed indeed in prehistory. We have already seen how he modeled Medwed's Hall, that would be Beorn's Hall, on modern archaeological reconstruction of a Norse mead hall. Similarly, in his 1932 Father Christmas letter, he drew on Paleolithic cave art. So too with Lake Town, which is closely modeled on the Neolithic lake dwellings, or Fallbauten, which means pile structures, first discovered in Switzerland in 1854 on the shores of Lake Zurich. And Ratliff goes on.
I'm glad you pronounced that German word, not me.
Fallbauten?
Fallbauten?
Fallbauten. If it's not, I'm in a world of hurt. Somebody's going to tell me. But I'm fairly sure that's Fallbauten. So I mean, 99% sure. I could be wrong. There's always a chance.
You got more German than I do, so I'm trusting you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what anything means anymore, but German has pretty consistent pronunciation rules. So, and you know, I could probably spend 20 minutes talking about what Ratliff talked about there, and going into the history of that particular thing and the drawings that were made of it and how they seem to have inspired the drawing in the text of Lake Town.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. So if any of you have the history of the Hobbit, it is worth looking up that essay just to learn a little bit more about Tolkien's incorporation of real-world archaeological history to create a believable backdrop for this city of men that appears in one chapter and is never seen again in the Legendarium.
Right.
And that's what I love about it. Yeah.
That's the amazing thing, just to back up this one. Yeah. This is something that happens just for a few pages.
It's amazing. It really is.
You know what I love about all this? I just noticed as you read that sentence again, the rotting piles of a greater town. The older town was greater.
Bigger. Mm-hmm.
And that
very medieval.
Gives us very medieval. We talked about the whole the Enta Yawerk, you know, the work of giants, the medieval people, especially medieval Anglo-Saxons, were surrounded by all these old Roman ruins and things. You know, these structures that they could not possibly build.
Oh, yeah.
They had lost the technology. And Tolkien's world is very much like that. Tolkien's world, certainly in the Third Age, is in decline. And so even here you see, this lake town is not as great as an earlier town that had once been built here. That's fascinating.
It is. You wonder how old that is. Is that from the age when they were great, when Dale in the North was rich and prosperous? I think it is.
I wonder.
171 years.
That would make sense. I mean, you got to figure wooden piles wouldn't last much longer than that.
No, that's true. In wet, yeah, you're right.
But that makes sense. I mean, that's based on what we know of the text. We know that that's when there was a great civilization here,
a greater town
here. Yeah. I mean, it could be older, I guess, but there's nothing to back that up, and it's conceivably it is the one that was there at the same time as Dale.
Yep, pretty amazing stuff.
I mean, just to keep things simple, that's kind of where I'm landing.
That's kind of where I'm landing as well. Yeah. I mean, it probably began further back than that 171, but it was probably destroyed in that time frame, or fell to ruin in that time frame.
And that's worth noting because don't get the idea that they built out on this lake to protect themselves from the dragon, because they were here long before the dragon was.
That is true. That is true. Though, that's certainly a natural defense.
It certainly helps.
Yeah.
It's probably,
Though, again, one would say building on a lake is a great idea to keep yourself safe from a dragon. Building things out of wood, not so much.
Building things on wood,
not
so that all a dragon has to do is, take out the piles underneath your city.
Yeah, exactly. But
so interesting.
So, but we still end up with all these old ruins, but men still don't remember any of it. It's all in the past.
Right.
It's just,
it's
kind of an example of what you said. We don't have that anymore. And they've kind of moved past it. Like, well, that was what it used to be. It used to be greater. It's not greater anymore. But a handful still remember the songs. And, we've talked about how important song is, especially to men. I remember in our Tolkien Reading Day episode last year, we talked a little bit about some of the songs of men. In fact, I think the one we're going to read later in this chapter was one that we read in that episode.
Oh, that's right. We did. Yeah, the Song of Prophecy.
Yeah. And it does seem that often men's poetry, men's songs come around to that sort of thing, to prophecy, I should say.
They're used to tell stories of the past and to talk about what's going to happen in the future.
Absolutely.
And I think it goes back to what we were just saying about their short lifespans.
Yes.
Dwarves, I suppose the dwarven songs that we've seen here do talk about prophecies, and they talk about history too.
A little bit,
But for men, I think that's even still more important, because that's how they preserve their history, is through song.
It's an oral history for sure. I mean, this is a way to bring that, to the next generation.
Whereas you look at something like Elvish songs that are usually, celebrations of the natural world in this book, or maybe look at something like Namadie, Galadriel's Lament in Fellowship. They're talking about the natural world. They're, lamenting the past. It's not so much about telling a story.
No.
Men's poetry is definitely about telling a story.
Very much so. And now, though, the men are telling a story, but they don't necessarily believe it.
Nobody believes it.
Yeah. I mean, some do, but as we'll find out, most don't. But they do, the songs at least talk about the king of the mountain coming back, and that gold would flow in rivers, and that all the land would be filled with new song and new laughter. Boy, isn't that last sentence telling? Well, this pleasant legend didn't much affect their daily business.
Yeah.
It's just a story.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, just a pleasant legend. Oh, it's just a little distraction, probably like, probably like we think of fairy tales today.
Exactly.
Something to tell the kids.
It's
maybe
just
something
a fun
to teach
story.
a lesson, but it's not something adults really think of that much.
Yep, exactly.
And that's sad. I think, forgetting history, forgetting stories of the past, forgetting myth. I think.
Oh yeah.
We'll see that later in this chapter. It's kind of a cardinal sin in Tolkien's world, I think.
And I think you're
we'll
right.
See how the ones who forget the past are not just doomed to repeat it, but there's something morally lacking, I think, in the people who
I think you're
forget
right.
the past.
There's definitely, we see that as the idea that remembering the past and not necessarily honoring it, that's kind of the wrong word, but like memorializing it would be a better way to put it.
Yeah, well, that's a good word.
Is really crucial. It's part of what maintains a cultural identity. And that, man, that's...
And those who forget that have I don't want to say no cultural identity, but they have less of a cultural identity. And maybe that's why people like that can be ruled by a master as opposed to a king.
Maybe,
I don't know.
Yeah, that could be. So they get to shore. The men are going to come and take the casks. The wood elves, are going to head into town to party with the men, which I find interesting. I love that the
they're all
elves are
feasting
apt.
together.
Yeah,
that is kind of a cool thing. There's a little bit of multiculturalism. There's the Lake Towners are cosmopolitan in their way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe not quite as cosmopolitan as they were featured in the film, which I'm not quite sure where they got some of the cultural ideas for Lake Town there, but at least they are friendly with the wood elves, which is good. So.
Yeah,
I'm going to have you take that the next passage about, what does he find in the barrels?
Right. Very good. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what happened down by the shore after they had gone and the shades of night had fallen. First of all, a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept a most unhappy dwarf. Wet straw was in his draggled beard. He was so sore and stiff, so bruised and buffeted, he could hardly stand or stumble through the shallow water to lie groaning on the shore. He had a famished and a savage look, like a dog that has been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could only have told it by his golden chain, and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky-blue hood, with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he would be even polite to the hobbit. "Well, are you alive or are you dead?" asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had had at least one good meal more than the dwarves, and also the use of his arms and legs, not to speak of a greater allowance of air. "Are you still in prison or are you free? If you want food, and if you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all and not mine, you had better slap your arms and rub your legs, and try and help me get the others out while there is still a chance." It's really...
He is very...
The dad is really coming out.
Isn't he? Yeah, he's just getting really cranky, man. He's...
Yeah. Well, he feels like, they're ungrateful. They do not... And they are ungrateful at this point. We'll see that in a moment. And, okay, they have good reasons.
Been in a barrel overnight.
Right. It hasn't really been a picnic for them.
No.
But he's frustrated. He's like, he worked so hard, and he was invisible for so long. He came up with this whole idea. Yeah. He executed this whole idea on short time.
Very short time.
Successfully.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, he doesn't really get... He doesn't get any appreciation for it.
Not yet. Yeah.
Of course he's getting a little cross,
Yeah.
It's understandable.
Of course it is. Thorin's, I love his description. I mean, the wet dog, basically. None too pleased, very unhappy about it. But, the next line, Thorin does see the sense of what Bilbo's telling him. And he may not be happy about it, but he recognizes we need to unpack these guys. It's kind of like when he got him out of the spider webs. None of them are in great shape.
Right.
Only 6 dwarves could answer.
Right. They're alive, but that's about it.
Yeah,
and it's kind of
they
the same
really
thing
are.
Here. Yeah.
None of them are very happy about it. And of course, Feely and Keely, or just Feely, I think, was absolutely disgusted with the smell of apples. I love that.
Yeah, I do really like that. The idea of just like sort of torture by apple smell.
Oh, goodness.
I happen to love apples, and I love the smell of apples, and just to think of like.
But for over a day,
exactly. I would hate the smell of apples after that too.
Yeah, you really. Oh.
And so I can really understand where he's coming from.
But at the end of all that, Thorin ends up really kind of recognizing Bilbo's involvement, and you had a catch here about service that I thought was worth discussing.
Oh yeah, well I remember that back at the beginning in chapter 1 when all the other dwarves were introducing themselves and they all said at your service in various different ways
Yep.
Dwalin at your service, Feely, Keely at your service. The one who did not was Thorin.
Yep, and the book made a point of saying that.
And the book made a point of saying he didn't say anything about service, but he didn't say that to Bilbo. Now. Later on in the book, we do see Thorin say "at your service" to Beorn. Mm-hmm. He even says it to the Goblin King, but he has not said it to Bilbo,
which I think is phrased as a polite nothing. But still, at least he said it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, at least he said it. At least he's showing some sort of recognition of the fact that this creature, the Goblin King, has power over him,
right?
Or that Beorn has power over him. This was, This had not happened with Bilbo before.
No, it did
now,
not.
In the last chapter, we did get a little, "I'm sure we are all forever at your service, whatever happens after this." There's sort of a begrudging, like, okay, sure, yeah, we will be at your service. Back when he had freed the dwarves. But now, for him to say that we are all very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins, that is a huge shift.
A huge step.
This more than just about anything, I think, shows how much respect Thorin has for Bilbo at this point, and how much he recognizes the power shift that has taken place in the party.
Yeah, Bilbo's the leader now.
Yeah, he really is.
Now
and
you
Thorin
are
gets
the master. Oh goodness!
Only a master of evil doth.
love, though, when they ask, like,
calls him Darth, not Vader. Anyway.
I know. Seriously, shouldn't it just be Vader? I don't know. I love it when they ask him, well, what should we do next? You're standing on the edge of a town. It's the first place where you could buy food or supplies since Bree. I mean, really? Where else are you going to go?
That's a good point.
Bilbo comes up with the obvious answer. Well, I suggest Lake Town.
Lake Town. What else is there?
Right. I mean, what are we going to do? I guess we could skip it and go straight up north, but I think
How about the place over there where there's fires burning and people having a good time and eating and drinking?
Do I need to remind you that you all are still probably rather hungry? Except for you, Feely, who've probably eaten too many apples. Let's go have a nice apple pie. Let's go.
He will not ever want apples again.
No, give him a big old glass of apple juice and some applesauce and a steaming apple pie. And just watch him just like hurl the whole time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read.
That's just cruel, man.
It is, I know.
That's cruel. Poor Feely.
Well, it's Feely. I mean, All right. Leaving the others, Thorin and Feely and Keely and the Hobbit went along the shore to the great bridge. There were guards at the head of it, but they were not keeping very careful watch, for it was so long since there had been any real need. Except for occasional squabbles about river tolls, they were friends with the wood elves. Other folk were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the graybeards and gammers who said they had seen him flying in the sky in their young days. That being so, it is not surprising that the guards were drinking and laughing by a fire in their hut, and did not hear the noise of the unpacking of the dwarves, or the footsteps of the 4 scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thorin Oakenshield stepped in through the door. "Who are you and what do you want?" they shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for weapons. "Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain," said the dwarf in a loud voice, and he looked it, in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed on his neck and waist. His eyes were dark and deep. "I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town." Then there was tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as if they expected the mountain to go golden in the night and all the waters of the lake turn yellow right away.
That's a fun detail. I love that.
The prophecies come true. There's the mountain still not yellow.
It's like hardly anybody remembers the old stories, and half the ones who do are it's just like, really, dude? You thought thought it was just going to happen?
Just like that. Silly. There's a lot of that, though. A lot of thinking it's just going to happen is what we'll see.
There is. I know we're going to talk about some more of that there. Yeah, more of that later, yeah.
So I love this little scouting party. I'm a little surprised that Thorin is part of the scouting party.
You would kind of think he would stay back. And, I mean, it's a good thing he does go with them because he's the one with the authority.
He's the king. But it is interesting because it violates that Federation Prime directive about putting him in the... who did we decide? Well, whether it's Feely or Keely, whichever one is next in line, he's with them.
The second in line for the next in line.
But I don't think they really thought they were in danger of their lives here. I mean, it's not as though they're enemies. They're not. I would think that they would feel more secure than they did dealing with the Elven King. I mean, there was no hostility between dwarves and men.
Between them and men.
Right.
And they know they're getting closer to their ancestral home.
Yeah.
At least, Thorin, having grown up here, he probably feels more comfortable. This is a place he's more familiar with. He probably just feels more confident.
Sure.
Let alone the fact that, we know that dwarves are perfectly comfortable in men's settlements.
That's true.
From the quest for Erebor that they spent some time in Bree and,
Yeah, that's true. A lot more
they've
so
been
than
in situations. Exactly, yeah. So there's one more thing that I like about this. We talked briefly about the guards. The guard, at the beginning of that passage you read, there's guards at the head of it, but they're not keeping a watch because there's
who
not.
They
just haven't had any.
Yeah.
They haven't had any enemies for a really long time.
Right.
And then we get how the younger people in the town not only doubted the existence of the dragon, but they laughed at the people who believed in it.
Full-on mockery.
Full-on mockery. And as I said earlier, this is a sign of foolishness, how foolish they are for Tolkien. And for some reason, I'm reminded of Mythopoeia, which it's been a while since we talked about Mythopoeia. But going back to some of our second episode,
Second episode, yep. Episode 2.
It's a It's a poem celebrating the value of myth in the modern age. And there's a passage in that poem that I'm reminded of here. He says, "Blessed are the legend makers with their rhyme of things not found within recorded time. It is not they that have forgot the night, or bid us flee to organized delight in lotus isles of economic bliss." He goes on a bit from there, but I just love that little snippet because, it reminds us that there is truth in myths. And, you may laugh at the graybeards and the gammers who are saying these crazy stories, but hey, if you don't, Tolkien is saying in his poem, if you don't believe these old legends, it's not because they're crazy, it's because you don't remember.
Exactly.
And that's what's going on here with the young Lake Towners. They're just sort of so wrapped up in their modern, this organized delight and economic bliss that they don't want to remember.
What a way to
They probably
put
don't
it.
want to think that a dragon could come out of the mountain at any moment. And,
No, that's true, and destroy their
destroy it all.
success.
Yeah.
So I love the moment when Thorin steps into the guard hut and poof, the lights go out and he falls asleep enchanted.
That would be amazing if that
Wouldn't that have
happened.
been cool? He just steps
That would
into the
have
hut
been
and
fantastic.
poof, little sparks fly up, and the next thing you know, he's dreaming about whatever food the men are eating. Okay, just kidding. Sorry. A little
And
bit
then
of
he
a
comes out,
digression.
why does this keep happening to me? I don't know why.
He wakes up going, not again.
Not again. Oh, no, not again.
Oh, goodness. This is the first appearance of men in the story, though, and I think this is really interesting. As we'll get to, as we start to see that, he wants to see the master of your town. So Thorin obviously knows how this town is run. He's not saying, I want to see your king. He knows the organization of this town. This is really the only oligarchy, for lack of a better word, of men that we really ever see in the Legendarium. You got Rohan, has a king. Gondor has a king, or should have a king. It has a steward and a king.
And even its steward is a hereditary.
Exactly, it's a hereditary office. And then even Lake Town 3 becomes part of the Kingdom of Dale. So so even this town's successor will no longer will then end up falling under a king again. And I think that there's something to be said
It's
for
like
that.
there will be a return of a king.
Gee, you think? That's the thing. Tolkien very much a monarchist. If you read his letters. And it's interesting that we see that here, that this is kind of, because it doesn't have a king, we end up seeing it kind of portrayed in a negative light. Certainly the master himself is, but even the town, even its kind of authority is questioned because it doesn't have that authority that
it doesn't have that it doesn't have a royal
right.
A son of the people.
Unifying the people.
Yeah.
So, but it is
That's an interesting thought to connect that to just the problems in Lake Town as a whole.
Yeah, even Thorin. He's king under the mountain. This is the king of Erebor. And of course, when asked, he identifies himself with that regal authority. Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Right.
And just as
you're right. Tolkien definitely seems to have been a monarchist based on his letters, and I know we could probably analyze some of his famous quotes endlessly and probably get a lot of mail on what Tolkien's actual political beliefs were.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is
I've got $5 on somebody saying anarchy in the next in one of our emails.
Because he does say that. There is that one quote.
You just have to take it in context, but yes.
Take it in context, and he immediately qualifies.
He clarifies exactly what he means by that.
But I think he's, in addition to whatever he believed himself, he's playing with this medieval concept of a land without a king, and how horrible things happen when a land is without a king. So much of the King Arthur myth is based on sort of the return of a king, having King Arthur, come back and sort of renew the land.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and even when we, going back to chapter 2, I think it was, when before they found the trolls, they were talking about the lands they were going through and how people hadn't heard of the king.
They've never heard of the king
and
here.
We talked about how that meant that they were lawless in a way. That they
uncivilized,
yeah. It was definitely in the context of being a negative, which for us in America, especially, where we've really kind of rejected the rule of kings, we've had to really kind of try to view that from a different perspective and look at that medievalist sort of concept and say that, a king represents all that is good, all that is noble, all that is righteous and just. And the assumption is that a king will rule justly. Yeah. So, amazing.
Yeah. And so that's why I think it's worthwhile to separate the literary literary concept of what a king represents to these people from, whatever a king may be in the real world.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously not all kings rule justly, but certainly in this sort of medieval context that he's coming from, that Tolkien's coming from.
And that is an important distinction, you're right.
A land without a king is a land in trouble.
Yeah, it's a land without law. It's a land without guidance, a land without wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
One little thing to note that in the manuscripts, I know we've seen the names Thrain and Thror before. Hey, that rhymes. This was actually the first time in the manuscripts that those names would appear. And so that was kind of interesting. But that was because at this point in the story, Bledorthin was renamed Gandalf and Gandalf was renamed Thorin.
So this is the point of the story from which he's writing with the names that
in the
they
manuscript, this was actually Thorin. It was no longer Gandalf. Okay. And I think Ratliff observed that, maybe Tolkien just couldn't allow himself to have the King of the Dwarves be named, Elfwand.
Wand Elf, yeah.
Or Wand Elf, yeah. So
very interesting.
I just thought that was an interesting little
So many good catches
point.
like that in Ratliff. It's
a ton.
It's
great observations.
It's a gold mine. Yeah,
I know. I mean, we could if we really actually
you're really good at finding those little things in there. That's really cool.
It's just a lot of fun. I mean, there's more, but we would spend hours on every chapter instead of
yeah.
And
we would basically just be reading Ratliff's book.
We really would, which would probably make him mad.
Right.
I'm grateful for John Ratliff's work. I don't want him to be mad at me.
Just go buy his book.
We have a link to it in our library. Please go get it. There's a single volume edition. I think there's still some 2-volume editions. I don't know if the 2-volume might come in paperback, but the single volume.
I have a 1-volume hardcover.
Yeah, I have a 1-volume hardcover, and it matches visually with the 3-volume History of Middle Earth set.
Yeah, it does.
And it works well with that on the shelf. So interesting that there's the captain of the guard here. Later, we find that Bard is the captain of a company of archers, and Ratliff speculates that it's possible that Bard is the captain of the guard. Which is very interesting, given the fact that the film makes him an absolute antagonist to the captain of the guard.
Yeah,
but anyway,
that's true. Yeah, that is true.
So
the film does make him the first person that they actually talk to, though.
Yeah, that is true.
There is that.
Yeah, which was cool. I did like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they made him very much a ne'er-do-well. In the film, and there's certainly nothing of that here. Let me have you take the next little bit. We've got where the captain of the guard has some things to say.
Okay. "If you come in peace, lay down your arms," said the captain. "We have none," said Thorin, and it was true enough. Their knives had been taken from them by the wood elves, and the great sword Orcus too. Bilbo had his short sword, hidden as usual, but he said nothing about that. "We have no need of weapons who return at last to our own as spoken of old. Nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master." "He is at feast," said the captain. "Then all the more reason for taking us to him," burst in Feely, who was getting impatient at these solemnities. "We are worn and famished after our long road, and we have sick comrades. Now make haste, and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you."
Indeed he might. This is the first time we find out that Orcus is gone. But, I mean, it only makes sense.
That's true.
I mean,
it does make sense.
All their weapons would have been taken.
And especially the elvish sword.
Yeah, the first age Gondolin sword.
Right. Yeah. Would be taken by the elf who loves treasure.
And hates the fact that dwarves have stolen some of elves' treasures before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. I do love, though, that Sting is still there. And Bilbo just kind of... You can see him with his hands behind his back. Oh, yeah, okay.
And nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see
move
here.
Move along.
Good thing there were no goblins around, because suddenly, it'd be like,
why is there a blue light behind your back?
Why is the Hobbit's leg glowing blue? Do they do that?
Hidden as usual. How does he hide that sword? I just want to know. Maybe I don't want to know. But yeah, I mean, like I said, what are we going to do? We're going to fight against you? There's 4 of us. You've got an entire town at your disposal.
Yeah.
Feely's response would be different if he found out that the master was eating some sort of, it's our fall apple festival. Oh, never mind. Don't take me there.
Don't take us. We'll go. We'll fend for ourselves.
Yeah. So they do decide to, they do lead them into the town. We get a little bit of description of the town itself and the tall piles on which were built the greater houses and things like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and read this next fairly lengthy section about their arrival in the hall.
All right.
From one great hall shone many lights, and there came the sound of many voices. They passed its doors and stood blinking in the light, looking at long tables filled with folk. "I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. I return," cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leaped to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the raftmen of the elves, who were sitting at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, "These are prisoners of our king that have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarves that cannot give any good account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people." "Is this true?" asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it far more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such person had ever existed. "It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by the elven king, and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land," answered Thorin. "But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old, nor is this town in the wood elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town or the men of the lake, not to the raftmen of the king." Oh, my goodness. Love that. Love that. I love Thorin.
Talking down a little to the raft elves.
Yeah.
Not these raftmen.
These pathetic little...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I do love the presence of Thorin when he steps forward. And before the captain could say, "Master, we have some guests." No, he just jumps in. Boom. This is who I am.
Yeah.
I'm back.
I return.
Yeah. I'm
definitely. He knows who he is, and
Yeah.
he makes sure everybody in that room knows who he is.
Exactly. And
there's not a hint of an uncertain ruler here. I mean, this guy is.
Oh, he is confident.
He is confident.
Yeah, does not lack in confidence. Everybody just taken aback by this. Up on your feet, and of course, the first people to complain are the wood elves.
Oh yeah.
But notice that the master, he's not necessarily sure to believe the wood elves, but he believes that that's more likely than the fact that this is actually the return of the king into the mountain. He's not even sure that such a person ever existed.
Yep. Wow. So we know the master is one of those people who doesn't believe the old stories.
Yep. And boy,
he has plenty of reason to disbelieve. He tends to disbelieve. Let's say. Yeah.
And that is not to his credit.
No.
No.
But Thorin's response, man, he is just right there with, "Look, actually, what happened is this.
Yeah.
We were wrongfully waylaid by the Elven King.
Yeah. And imprisoned without cause. I love that the wood elves say that they were sneaking through the woods and molesting our people. I frankly felt like Thorin was going to say, "Well, actually, no, we were just starving." Because that is all they were doing.
He do his starving bit
again.
We were starving.
What did you say something about how dare you starve so loudly in my forest? Your riot and clamor. I love that. That was brilliant, Sean. Absolutely brilliant.
That's right.
The elves were complaining about your riot and your clamor disturbed. Riot and clamor. We were just dying. That's all.
We were just dying.
Oh goodness.
Yeah. But that was our stomachs growling before they finally gave up.
Exactly. Never mind that y'all were, harping and singing and, partying and having general fun. But even though we're not going to read the next bit, we see the master is kind of like, what do I do? He's very calculating, right? He doesn't want to tick off the Elven King, but he's not sure because he knows that all these songs are very popular. They're in heavy rotation on the local radio station. And of course, and he doesn't really end up having very much time to decide. The matter ends up getting decided for him. Yeah,
the people decide for him. Yeah.
And what do they do?
Well, some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain. That it was Thror's grandson, not Thror himself, that had come back, did not bother them at all. Others took up the song, and it rolled loud and high over the lake. The king beneath the mountains, the king of carven stone, the lord of silver fountains shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his halls shall echo golden to songs of yore resung. The woods shall wave on mountains and grass beneath the sun, his wealth shall flow in fountains and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn, all sorrow fail and sadness at the Mountain King's return.
I love that. It's
a powerful song.
It is.
It is a powerful song of
the prophecy.
We talked about it's prophetic. It's
all very
renewal.
positive.
It's kind of apocalyptic, in a positive sense.
In a positive sense, that's the thing. I mean,
about a rebirth.
Yeah,
and
I mean, there's a hint that's there about destruction, but only if you know the story that the lake shall shine and burn. But that's not what not what I don't think
but
is.
That's not literally what they mean.
No,
I think they're talking about
the gold,
the streams shining gold.
Exactly, and because look at the very next line: all sorrow fail and sadness. Mm-hmm. In other words, there will be no sorrow, there will be no sadness. They fail when the Mountain King comes back. And clearly that's not going to happen.
And that's what I mean by apocalyptic.
Yes.
Is the sort of the
this is the good end of the world, the eucatastrophic end of the world.
Yeah, the rebirth.
The rebirth.
The rebirth of this world. Of this.
I noticed, though, the second stanza really does remind me a little bit of the Misty Mountains Cold poem from the very first chapter, only because of the mentioning of the crown, the harp, the songs echoing in halls. That's very reminiscent of
that's a good catch.
The Misty Mountains Cold. So you wonder how much of this maybe comes from things they'd heard from the dwarves.
You wonder if it's based on the old Dwarven song.
Right.
Maybe they had heard snippets of the old Dwarven, or heard the whole song, and this is sort of a retelling or
that's exactly
translation.
Yeah. It almost makes me think that, or at least that portion of it. Yeah. But I think the other thing that jumped out at me in this entire deal, in this whole song, everything's just supposed to happen. Nobody does anything. There's no.
Well, that's like
and he shall do
that's like
this.
the people who.
I mean, the only thing that he does is that he'll come into his own. But everything else, it's not that he restrings his harp or his people sing songs. It's his halls shall echo gold and the songs of yore resung. It's all passive. It's all, frankly, and I'm probably stretching the point too much.
They don't really talk about they don't really talk about a subject.
No. There's nobody doing anything. Right. There's nobody accomplishing anything. And to me, that kind of speaks of their reliance on fate to make this happen. Which in turn makes me think of the dwarves and their tendency to count the gold as already theirs. I mean, they don't even think about any effort. They don't even bring any weapons.
As opposed to Bilbo, who has a combination of luck and fate,
exactly.
luck/fate, and the wits and the agency to know how to use it. Yeah.
That's the thing. And we've talked about the role of luck or the role of fate, but we've also talked about the necessity to use the wisdom or wit to accomplish things, and that luck will then kind of intervene from time to time. You can't just sit back and expect those things to happen. You have to go do.
Right.
And then the luck comes. It's interesting.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's like the people going out and expecting that the mountain would go golden in the night.
Right.
The water's already
immediately.
Yellow. Like, oh, Thorin's here. Oh, I guess everything's cool now. All of our problems are solved. No, that's not the way it works.
No, but now that this song has been sung, the master really doesn't have much of a choice in terms of how he's going to respond. He, as the text says,
definitely
obeys the general clamor.
He obeys the general clamor. That was the part that reminded me of Orodreth from the first stage.
Oh, yeah, Orodreth. You're right, the consummate politician.
We talked about him.
I wondered who you were talking about when you said that. I was like, well, I mean, because Fëanor was a bit of a politician, but that doesn't sound like who you're talking about.
Yeah, no, because he was more of a controller. Orodreth was the one who just took over Nargothrond after Finrod moved on to greener pastures, and
well, yeah, after being
far
in a
greener
dungeon,
pastures in the uttermost west.
Yeah,
but Orodreth, he was kind of weak. He kind of just followed the wind. Like, well, what if you? All right, we'll listen to Caligorm and Curfin.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. He was rather a weak leader. So, interestingly, Bilbo's given a place of honor here along with Thorin and Fili and Kili. But you made an interesting catch, didn't you? Because in a couple paragraphs we get something, huh?
Yeah, we do. It's interesting. In just a couple of paragraphs, we're told that for 3 days he, Bilbo, sneezed and coughed, and he could not go out. And even after that, his speeches at banquets were limited to the classic line.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And yet in Lord of the Rings, at the long-expected party, Bilbo actually says that September 22nd, his birthday, was the anniversary of his arrival, and I'll quote here a little bit, by barrel at Esgaroth on the Long Lake, though the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion. I was only 51 then, and birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, though I had a bad cold at the time, I remember, and could only say thank you very much. So reconciling this account of actually going to the banquet with the fact that for 3 days he sneezed and coughed and couldn't leave.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really know how
It's a question, isn't it? I'm not
how to
sure.
reconcile this.
I mean, we're not told that he said anything in this particular banquet, but we know that after this he didn't go out for 3 days because of his cold, and it was only then that "thank you very much" is mentioned.
Right.
So I mean, it's specifically mentioned that he says it at banquets later on, and it's not mentioned here. So it's just a little weird. Maybe Bilbo's memories are a little off. He remembers.
It could be that his memory is just a little off.
He remembers the banquets all happening in
Yeah.
that time frame, but
And he remembers he remembers trying to stand up and giving a speech and only being able to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, he can't remember specific dates and things like that.
That's okay. He obviously wasn't feeling well, so of course he probably,
Yeah, I can't remember what happened a couple of months ago when I was feeling sick.
No. I can't remember what happened a couple of weeks ago when I was healthy, but that's a whole other problem.
Right. That's
all right. Yeah, you don't need to worry about
well, that's
that.
just getting older, but hey, we're not Bilbo old yet.
No, we're not. Not quite yet. Well, I'm getting awfully close to Bilbo's birthday, sadly. I'm
Oh yeah, you
a
are.
little over a year away from my September 22nd, except it won't be in September, but we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely leave it there.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and pick up as the dwarves settle in. So as they settle in, basically they're given a house, they're fed. I mean, everything is like, woohoo, we're so glad you're here. And then they get like their own custom, choir set up. I mean, seriously, they're given a big house.
I imagine hordes of screaming teenage girls like when the Beatles landed at JFK
Oh my
in
goodness.
1964.
See, I was thinking of almost like the master sending out like specific choirs, but yeah, that could work too. I love that boats and rowers were put up at their service. That's like they're given free Uber rides, around town. But so this choir, what do they sing? Well, some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoke confidently of the sudden death of the dragon and of cargoes of rich presents coming down the river to Lake Town. These were inspired largely by the master, and they did not particularly please the dwarves. But in the meantime they were well contented, and they quickly grew fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine cloth of their proper colors, with beards combed and trimmed, and proud steps. Thorin looked and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Smaug chopped up into little pieces. I know, I love that.
That can't be good.
No, that's not. No, it cannot.
It's not good foresight.
No. Then, as he had said, the dwarves' good feeling towards the little hobbit grew stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank his health, and they patted him on the back, and they made a great fuss of him, which was just as well, for he was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon, and he had, besides, a shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed, and he could not go out, and even after that, his speeches at banquets were limited to, "Thank you very much." So,
there you go.
Yeah. My goodness. So we get, again, song telling stories amongst men, and even if they're wrong stories, even if they're not factual stories, it is how they tell stories. It's these songs that tell of these amazing things.
Speaking confidently of the sudden death of the dragon. Again,
passive
passive.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, the dragon's just suddenly going to die. That's how this is going to play out.
Oh, Thorin's here. I'll just crawl into a corner and die.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And all of a sudden, rich presents, it's not just trade, it's just flat out gift.
Yeah.
Here's some
Which
money.
That didn't please the dwarves very much.
Yeah, dwarves, that's part of my 14th. Whose 14th is coming down here? But dwarves do continue to grow their respect for Bilbo, but I think the key here really is Thorin's, shall we say, advanced chicken counting. Really, this is...
It's such a vivid image, too.
And Smaug
chopped up into little pieces. It's such a great little bit of narrative hyperbole.
It really is.
That really
minced Smaug pie.
That really accentuate. What it does is it accentuates the ridiculousness of Thorin's.
How ridiculous
Thorin's
is it
thought,
to imagine a dragon chopped up into little pieces?
Right. And that's just how ridiculous it is that Thorin thinks his kingdom's already regained.
Yeah.
He's so far from that.
You really are. You've got some time to go before you get there.
Yeah. You're not there yet.
No, you are not.
But you are not a king yet.
Now, we actually, rather than skipping anything, you actually read the next two paragraphs, don't you?
Yep. In the meanwhile, the wood elves had gone back up the forest river with their cargoes, and there was great excitement in the king's palace. I have never heard what happened to the chief of the guards and the butler. Nothing, of course, was ever said about keys. Yeah, I know, right? Nothing, of course, was ever said about keys or barrels while the dwarves stayed in Lake Town, and Bilbo was careful never to become invisible.
Well, yeah.
Still, I dare say more was guessed than was known, though doubtless Mr. Baggins remained a bit of a mystery. In any case, the king knew now the dwarves' errand, or thought he did, and he said to himself, oh, now I got to do my Thranduil voice.
Yeah.
Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter. But I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right.
Oh, serve them right.
I know, right?
Harsh.
That is really harsh, actually.
I hope they die. I mean, really, that's terrible.
That is, I don't know, maybe I was a little too hard on movie Thranduil and his hatred of dwarves. He, at any rate, did not believe in dwarves fighting and killing dragons like Smaug, and he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like it, which shows he was a wise elf and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He sent out his spies about the shores of the lake and as far northward towards the mountain as they would go, and waited.
Yeah. I love how his first answer to this is an economic answer. I mean, you're not going to be able to get your treasure through my land without me getting to have some input on this.
Right.
Without me getting a piece of this pie.
There's going to be a toll.
Yeah. He's been dealing with the master and with Lake Town so long that he's beginning to think like them.
To think in trade and tolls like the master. Yeah.
Poor guard captain and butler. I mean,
poor guard captain and the butler. We don't find out what happened, but
it can't be a good thing.
Guessing at least two of those cells were not empty for a while.
For a little while. Yeah, I don't think they got promoted. I don't think,
Nope.
I don't know where you would get promoted from either of those positions, but
poor Galleon.
Poor Galleon. And the unnamed other one.
Unnamed captain.
That's too funny.
But the king, I mean, he's pretty close to guessing what Thorin's plan is.
He just thinks about it logically. Well, let's see. 12 dwarves with almost no weapons. I mean, I've got Orcus right here. Are going to go trying to take on a dragon that ate an entire town.
Right.
What's going to happen there? Okay, so they're going to die. Fine. That's fine with me. In the meantime, that means they must have some other approach. They're probably not going to try an open attack. So what would they do? Oh, maybe they'll steal something from his hoard. Yeah. He figures it out. Pretty close.
But then that raises the question that I think Bilbo raises in a couple of chapters. It's like, what are you expect me to steal the treasure like one armful at a time?
Seriously,
basically,
that would take the rest of your life. Good stuff. So they're there for a couple of weeks, and they begin to think about leaving. The enthusiasm, he realizes we got to strike while the iron's hot. Really, I mean that's the deal. We've got to, if we let this kind of momentum cool down, if we let this popularity wane, we're not going to get what we need.
We're not going to get the support we have.
Right.
The phrase that comes to my mind, he's got political capital with the people of Lake Town right now.
Yeah, you're right. Use it now.
I know Thorin is not an elected official, but it's the same concept.
It's still absolutely political
He's got
capital.
the people behind him.
Yeah. Use it while you have it.
And he wants to take advantage of that.
Yeah, use it or lose it. So I'm going to go ahead and do our last reading of the chapter, and it'll actually take us through the end of the text.
Okay.
Then for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened, and he wondered if Thorin was, after all, really a descendant of the old kings. He had never thought that the dwarves would actually dare to approach Smaug, but believed they were frauds who would sooner or later be discovered and be turned out. He was wrong. Thorin, of course, was really the grandson of the king under the mountain, and there is no knowing what a dwarf will not dare and do for revenge or the recovery of his own. But the master was not sorry at all to let them go. They were expensive to keep, and their arrival had turned things into a long holiday in which business was at a standstill. Kind of like March Madness, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let them go and bother Smaug and see how he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, O Thorin, Thrain's son, Thror's son, was what he said. You must claim your own. The hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust to your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So one day, although autumn was now getting far on and winds were cold and leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Lake Town, laden with rowers, dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had been sent round by circuitous paths to meet them at their appointed landing place. The master and his counselors bade them farewell from the great steps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quays and out of windows, which is actually better than singing in the windows and out of keys, because that would sound like they were singing out of key. Sorry.
Oh, well done.
That was a pun, years in the making.
That was fantastic.
It was actually right at the spur of the moment as I sang on the keys. I never sing on keys, so. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north up the lake on the last stage of their long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo, which is just awesome. And yeah, you're right. Absolutely right at the beginning of the chapter.
Starts and ends on Bilbo thinking about what's coming next. And he's the only one who's wise enough to realize what this means. They're entering the last stage of their journey. What exactly does that mean?
That means
we have
danger.
to figure out what to do about the dragon.
Yeah. As bad as the forest was, as bad as the goblins were, we've got a dragon to deal with. Mm-hmm. So, one thing we did mention it, but we didn't go too far into it, at the end of a fortnight. So we're looking now, it's probably about October 5th or 6th, depending on whether the fortnight counted.
Thank you for doing the math.
Yeah. So, no wonder it's turning cold. We are again in a northern climes, so it's going to be very cold. Winds are cold, leaves are off the trees. It's getting to be time.
You made the joke about March Madness, the master being happy to see him go.
Yeah. Economic standstill. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very very key that he's not happy to see them go because he thinks, they're going to go take care of the dragon problem. They're going to bring peace to this land. No, he's worried about the ledger. They're bad for commerce.
They're terrible for commerce.
They cost us
a ton of money, and they cost us a ton of generated income. It's like we're not only are we spending money, we're making less at the same time.
Right.
So it's a double hit.
Right.
The GDP of Lake Town has gone down.
It's gone down since Thorin and Dwarves showed up for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's a big party, and that's why I analogize it to March Madness. Every year when that comes around, for those of you who don't live in the United States, March Madness is the name for a college basketball tournament involving, it used to be 64 teams. Now I guess it's 65 with the play-in game. But it's, all these rounds, single elimination rounds, and it goes on for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah.
It's and there's so much betting.
And all you see during this time is,
everybody's got their brackets.
All people talk about it.
Yeah, everybody's got their brackets where they picked who's going to win what games.
Picked who's going to win, who's going to go all the way to the championship.
Yeah. And it's a huge thing, like office pools, where people are betting money.
Yep.
And every year around the time that March Madness starts, you see these articles about how many billions of dollars March Madness is costing American businesses. Which is very,
It's through lack of productivity and lack of
people spending hours and hours not working.
Money. Yeah. It's fascinating.
It really is fascinating.
That kind of stuff is fascinating to me. That's great.
So the master's really surprised. They can't really be planning on attacking Smaug, but like you said, they're costing a lot of money. He never believed that he was who he said he was. He's a man, like you said, who is ignorant of history and myth. Which is a problem in Tolkien's world.
Yeah.
It does not speak well of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's all self-interest.
I also like
all self-interest.
Totally on self-interest. He has no sense of his place in the greater world.
Even when he gave them honor and laud, it was to gain or to keep the support of the people.
To get support. Yeah, exactly. It was flattery. It was just for his own his own approval
and you
ratings.
can see even here, okay, we're going to help you, but why? We trust your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. In other words,
he's laying it on pretty thick.
Yeah, he's counting the money right there. And yet, we'll see later on, later in the story, that he turns the anger of the people back onto the dwarves. I mean, he's the guy who kind of triggers that enmity that leads to the Battle of the Five Armies. I mean, okay, he's not alone, but he really starts that ball rolling. And again, it's all about self-interest. He doesn't care about the dwarves. So, but yeah, good stuff. So
that's a good catch. I also like he assumes Thorin's a fraud.
Yes,
probably because he knows he's a fraud.
Exactly. It takes one to know one.
Right, and a person like that thinks that's just the way the world works.
Right, exactly.
You know?
Pot, kettle, pot. But I do think that wraps up for our chapter discussion, right, Sean?
I think it
Do you think
does.
there's any more stuff to discuss?
No, I don't think so. I think we're ready to move on to Barlowman's Bag. And
Yeah.
A fun reminder about our upcoming big plans.
Absolutely. We've got some great questions coming up in the bag, and I think you, Sean, you mentioned that there's an observation.
We've got a really interesting observation by another listener that folks aren't going to want to miss. So stick around for that.
Yep.
But first, our big news.
Yep. And folks, if you follow us on social media, you've paid any attention at all over the last half dozen episodes, we've been invited to Myth Moot. Myth Moot 5 as special guests. This June, that's June 2018, for those of you listening off in the far distant future. You know what? It happened to me. I was listening to a podcast the other day that I realized was from 200006. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They have dates on them.
Yeah. No, I knew that. I'd forgotten, because it was
Right.
about a topic that isn't timely. It's another, like Tolkien.
An evergreen topic.
An evergreen topic. That's right. So it really is an incredible opportunity. We're looking forward to it in a big way.
Super excited about it. Partly because we're going to be doing something really special. We're going to be doing a live episode broadcast from Myth Moot. We'll be in the main room. We'll be the only event in our time slot, and we're going to be joined by some special guests.
Very special guests. John Garth and Corey Olson are both going to come back on the show. We're going to get to talk to the editor of the Annotated Hobbit, Douglas A. Anderson, and also Mark Ockran, the professional conlanger who also invented Klingon.
Yeah. Can't wait to catch up with John Garth and Corey Olson. Can't wait to get a chance to talk to Douglas Anderson about all his work that we've been referencing so much on the show. And, Mark Ockran, I think, is going to be a really fantastic discussion, too. So
absolutely.
Going to be great stuff.
Absolutely. Well, the show is going to air live on Facebook at the time of the event. That's Saturday, June 23rd at 1 o'clock Eastern Time for now. I mean, if there are any changes, we'll let you know. But that does seem to be the firm date and time for our live broadcast. But it'll also be released the next morning as episode 88.
And if we stay on our current schedule, that's going to be coming out right when we're wrapping up, right about the same time, I should say, right when we're wrapping up The Hobbit. And we'll be getting ready for season 3. I mean, we could not have planned that if we had tried.
No, you're right. And I think that's true. I think our retrospective will air the week before Myth Moot. I mean, it's,
okay.
Assuming
Perfect.
we stay on schedule. So, Myth Moot is covering our event registration, and we're grateful for that. It even includes our meals, which saves us some money. But we still have to find, well, for us, that actually saves a lot of money, doesn't it? We're like hobbits. We can eat a ton of meals.
Yes.
But we still have to find a way to get there and stay there for a few days. We can't sleep in our... I don't know. We won't even have our cars because we won't be driving. It's too far to drive.
Can't sleep in a rented car.
No, but, getting from California to Virginia isn't exactly a stroll from Hobbiton to Buckland, or even Frogmorton for that matter. And I know that Texas isn't much closer. So that means we have some costs associated with this trip.
Yeah, so we're coming to you, our listeners, to ask you for your help. Now, we recently started a special T-shirt campaign to raise funds, so please do go check that out on our Facebook page. Also, please consider joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. That's our Patreon family at patreon.com/prancingponypod. Now, we weren't planning to do a live episode from a moot until we got to our next goal, but we just couldn't turn this opportunity down.
No, we couldn't.
And I hope you folks understand that.
Yeah, and so now we're coming to you to help make it happen. We are grateful for all that you guys have done for us so far, and it's thanks to our Patreon family that we've been able to make some of the improvements we've made, including this move to weekly episodes we've been doing for all of season 2. So, we want to make it worth your while, though, with more than just that. We have included some very fun rewards, including some really cool exclusive content.
Like our postscripts to each episode. Any great insights we left out during the show or didn't think about,
mediocre
really awful
insights.
jokes. We don't have too many great insights.
Yeah, those are rare.
Lots of mediocre ones. Really awful jokes, extremely embarrassing mistakes. We put those in a 10 or so minute postscript that's available to our Patreon supporters.
Quantity has a quality all its own. That's all I'll say about those insights.
That's our motto.
That's right. Speaking of quantity, we are nearing 5 hours of exclusive postscript content this season. So, it really, I know we started out saying they'd be 5 to 10 minutes. Really, I think they average about 12. Most of them are 15 or more.
Closer to 15, yeah.
But those posts...
I keep saying 10 just so I don't overpromise.
I know. Overpromise, underdeliver. No, it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Those postscripts typically release the same day as the episode that they follow. And if you want access to that bonus, along with some cool swag and other goodies, be sure to join the Fellowship of the Podcast. And again, thank you to those of you who've already joined. You really, 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 really are helping to make this show even better, just in case, we hadn't made that clear so far. And we want to give a real special shout-out to D-May in Alaska and James in Virginia. They are our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. Now, if you want a personalized shout-out on our episodes, you know where to go.
And while we do truly appreciate your support, please don't feel obligated by any means.
No.
Only if you can afford it, and only if you think we've earned it, should you consider signing up for the Fellowship of the Podcast. We know some of you can't or are choosing to support us in other ways, and that's great. We are grateful for all of your support, whatever form it takes. So even if you can't join us at Patreon, please keep enjoying the podcast, keep sharing it. We'll keep making it.
Absolutely, Sean. Well, why don't we go ahead and get on with Barliman's Bag? This episode's getting already a little long in the tooth.
It is. Well, not long ago, Nathaniel G. in Virginia wrote in with a question about dwarves. He said, did dwarves figure in the pre-Hobbit draft? Let me start that over. Did dwarves figure in the pre-Hobbit drafts of what became the Silmarillion? Or were they retconned in to make sense of the central role that dwarves play in The Hobbit? The Ainulindale concerns the children of Iluvatar, which seem to be just elves and men, and the transitions between the first, second, third, and now fourth ages illustrate the decline of the former and the rise of the latter. The place of dwarves is conspicuously missing. Another way of asking my question is whether Tolkien was forced to find room for the dwarves in his high fantasy because he had written what was initially a standalone children's book, The Hobbit, which, unlike his high fantasy as originally conceived, just happened to have dwarves instead of elves among its main characters.
That's a good question.
Really interesting question. What role did dwarves play in the Legendarium before?
In the early versions,
before The
right.
Hobbit. Yeah, the early versions. A fantastic question. The short answer, Nathaniel, is dwarves did figure in the early writings. They're in the Book of Lost Tales and the early versions in the Quenya, early versions of the Quenta. Early versions of the Quenya.
Yeah.
So they were in those early writings, but they were not friendly.
No.
Far from it. Christopher Tolkien actually went so far as to add a parenthetical note in the Book of Lost Tales, Volume 1, where he says, in the early writings, the dwarves are always portrayed as an evil people.
Oh, my goodness.
And they really are. If you look at some of the things they do, which I'll talk about in a moment, they really are evil. And Ratliff, I think, makes some observations about this in one of the essays in the History of the Hobbit, which I think you've got there, right, Alan?
I do. He says that the most significant departure in The Hobbit from the old mythology of the Silmarillion texts lies in the new story's more or less sympathetic treatment of Durin's folk. In their early appearances in Tolkien's tales, the dwarves had always been portrayed as an evil people, allies of goblins, mercenaries of Morgoth, pillagers of one of the great elven kingdoms. Thus, their characterization here is totally at variance with what is said and shown of them in the old legends. And the break is both sudden and complete. No intermediate stages prepared the way. For them to be treated sympathetically as heroes of the new story is nothing short of amazing, no less surprising than if a company of goblin wolf riders had ridden up to Bag End seeking a really first-class burglar.
It's really, really strong words, but true.
Yeah.
I mean, the dwarves really are just that evil in the early writings. One of the main interactions we see between dwarves and elves early on is the tale of the Nauglyph Ring, later called the Nauglamir,
Right.
and we've talked about it a few times already. It's actually mentioned in this story, the story of Thingol. Sorry, a reference to the story of Thingol. You know what
I
I'm
know
trying
what
to
you're
say.
trying to say. We talked about it when we talked about the Thingol Thranduil connection.
The Elven King's identity and the inspiration of Thingol and so forth.
Exactly.
In the earliest version of the Book of Lost Tales, the dwarves who killed Thingol, who was called Tinwilint at the time, were much more treacherous and vicious than they ended up being in the final Silmarillion. They actually allied with orcs to pillage Tinwilint's halls. Allied with orcs. And they didn't just kill the king himself, they actually beheaded him and presented his head to the queen, still crowned and helmed with gold.
Oh, that's nasty.
Awful, awful guys the dwarves were in the early versions, and they were frequently allied with Melko, which was the early version of Melkor and Morgoth. Really evil. I mean, just the worst, or almost the worst, right up there with orcs and Morgoth. Ratliff actually suggests that Tolkien later created the distinction that we see in the Silmarillion between the petty dwarves and the seven houses of the dwarves.
Yeah.
He thinks that distinction may have been added later, after the creation of The Hobbit. And this would have given him a way to show both good dwarves like Thorin and the rest of Durin's folk that we get here, versus wicked dwarves like Mime and the other petty dwarves who are seem to be extinct by the Third Age.
They do.
Mime and his sons were the last.
Yeah. Man, that really is a great question, Nathaniel. And honestly, with answers I didn't anticipate. I mean, it's been so long since I've done a deep dive into the history of Middle Earth, and I oftentimes have gone straight to the stuff from Lord of the Rings, like volumes 4, 5, and 6, and so the Book of Lost Tales 1 and 2 I've not spent as much time in. So it was really cool to get that information. I
got to tell you, I've enjoyed going back, and I have not read it cover to cover, but I've been going back and looking a lot at the Book of Lost Tales as we've been talking about The Hobbit. Because, I mean, that was the stuff that Tolkien.
That's what he had in his mind. That was his legendary at that point. Yeah. I wish I had time to do that. I've got this podcast I'm doing that.
We've got a podcast and day jobs.
And families and
and all that
stuff.
But really, really interesting stuff.
Absolutely.
And we usually the Book of Lost Tales is something we just kind of throw out. So much of it is superseded by what came later. Yeah. But it is illuminating in a way for what was in his mind when he was writing The Hobbit.
I agree.
Anyway.
Well, thanks, Nathaniel. And now we have not a question, but a really excellent observation by Giampiero. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Giampiero C. in Lombardy, Italy. It's kind of a long one, but bear with us. So he says, a thought about Bilbo, Frodo, and Sam. It seems to me that Bilbo and Sam end up being more similar to one another than Bilbo and Frodo. I'll explain. Bilbo throughout The Hobbit maintains his hobbitishness intact, like Sam, even after what all they've gone through in their respective journeys. Yes, they are wiser, more disenchanted, but still cheerful and willing to enjoy some simple Hobbit pleasures. Frodo, on the other hand, seems, quite early into the adventure, to acquire more of an elvish attitude towards reality, a sort of sadness and distance that becomes more and more prominent after his wounding, and especially after the destruction of the ring. Now, Giampiero says he realized this when reading this passage from Chapter 3 of The Hobbit. "Is that the mountain?" asked Bilbo in a solemn voice, looking at it with round eyes. He had never seen a thing that looked so big before. "Of course not," said Balin. "That is only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, and we have to get through or over or under those somehow, before we can come into Whittle and beyond. And it's a deal of a way even from the other side of them to the Lonely Mountain in the east, where Smaug lies on our treasure." "Oh," said Bilbo, and just at that moment he felt more tired than he ever remembered feeling before.
It's a pretty powerful moment for Bilbo.
It really is.
And Giampiero, he actually compared that moment to a similar, let's call it a misidentification of another mountain by Sam in Lord of the Rings. This is in Book 2, Chapter 3. And Sam says, "Too warm, I shouldn't wonder," muttered Sam to Frodo. "But I'm beginning to think it's time we got a sight of that fiery mountain and saw the end of the road, so to speak. I thought at first that this here Redhorn, or whatever its name is, might be it, till Gimli spoke his piece. A fair jawcracker dwarf language must be."
And indeed it is. And Giampiero goes on to point out that both Bilbo and Sam mistake a common mountain for the one they're looking for, and both stand corrected by a dwarf. I wouldn't read too much into the parallel. Surely I wouldn't dare to say it was intentional. At best, it's an insight on how small the world of both Bilbo and Sam is at this point in their journeys. He's right. And he wonders what we think of this. And,
definitely.
He wonders what we think and why we think that is.
It's a brilliant observation.
It really is. Really, truly.
Absolutely spot on. I could not agree more. I mean, the case of the mistaken mountains. It's a clear parallel, intentional or not. Yeah. And I suspect it was, I like to think it was at least partly intentional. But, I mean, it shows, regardless of whether it's intentional or not, it shows that both Bilbo and Sam start from a similar misconception.
Yeah.
The misconception that the world is smaller than it actually is. Yep. And I think that is sort of a manifestation of their own desire for it to be smaller. They're both they're both hobbitish, as Giampiero says. Part of them just kind of wants to get their quest over with and go back home.
Can I be done? Can I be done?
Yeah. They want the world to be smaller. Mm-hmm. Why is Frodo different? I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. It could have something to do with his possession of the ring at that point.
Which is certainly acting differently than it was when Bilbo possessed it.
Yeah, that's true, because Sauron is more
seeking
alert
more,
and kind of active in the world, yeah. But I also think it could just be something more mundane than that. I think Frodo has learned more from Bilbo than anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think Frodo starts his journey with a head full of stories, and not just, Hobbit fairy tales, but,
real
elven lore.
Stories, yeah.
Yeah, real stories that Bilbo has told him. He's better educated about the world than Bilbo or Sam is at the beginning of their stories.
Right.
One would expect Frodo to understand just how big the world is. Now, his learning is all book knowledge, but he does have sort of a sense of his place in the world that maybe Bilbo or Sam didn't have starting out.
Right.
Now, obviously, I know Bilbo and Sam didn't exactly start out at the same place. Bilbo was pretty wealthy, and Sam, was working class. But still, Bilbo and Sam kind of had to learn about the world by living in it, and maybe that's why there's that similarity.
Yeah.
Then again, maybe Tolkien would also say that Bilbo and Sam are both the heroes of their stories.
True.
So there's that similarity as well.
That's true.
They should be more humble in their origins because it gives them farther to go in terms of achieving, the change, the ennoblement that happens to them as part of their journey.
I can see that.
Hobbitish small-mindedness, I think, is part of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a question of where they start from, really. I mean, Bilbo starts from an even simpler place than Sam. Sam at least had heard bits and pieces of Bilbo's story. But,
that's a good point,
but Frodo, man, he's another story entirely. I mean, he's learned of all of this through Bilbo and, it must be said, Gandalf.
True.
If you recall in the books, this is definitely an area where it distinguished itself from the movies. The books, Tolkien's conversation with Frodo about the danger of the ring and its original owner, that all takes place, a very long time, years. I forget how many years now. Long before he and Sam.
17, 18,
I think 17
yeah.
years. That's a long time before he and Sam, along with those other two troublemakers, leave the Shire.
That's a good point.
He's been pondering this for a long, long time. So I think that's got a lot to do with it. Well, thanks to both of you, Nathaniel and Giampiero. That wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. But still hang out for a little while, wait for the music. As always, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again next time when we get to Chapter 11 of The Hobbit.
We'll finally get to that mountain we've been hearing so much about and seeing.
Yep.
But will our heroes be able to get inside?
Oh, you know the answer to that. Folks, we do want to encourage you all to read along. Not too far ahead, mind you, but and to take notes in your copy of The Hobbit. So please check out the official library tab on our website, the prancingponypodcast.com. That's theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got links to everything from inexpensive paperbacks to some really good stuff here at Tolkien Shelves.
And in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd really be grateful for that. Every new review we get just helps us get more visibility in iTunes, and that translates to a bigger community of Tolkien lovers, which is what we're all about building.
Yep.
And make sure you never miss an episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast by subscribing to the show through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. You can find us in most any podcast directory, including Spotify.
And we're even on Potable now. It's a discovery platform that finds new and emerging creators and recommends them to you. Other apps make you sort through clunky charts, but Potable learns your interests and, kind of like Netflix, recommends new shows and episodes. So you get to spend less time searching and more time listening.
And we want to thank all of you who have become part of our social media family at our online common room on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and also now on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
That's right. And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or readings of your favorite Tolkien poetry with a very Butch-style head cold. That should be fun.
That's going to be great.
Please make them video readings if you can to barlaman@theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get him into our next episode. Well, hour 45 is still far too short a time to spend amongst such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.